everybody, and welcome back to 321 Talk. My name is Ben Barber. I am your host for the show and one of the managing partners here at 321 Media. And today, my guest is the one and only, the incredible, he is an author, Dr. Barry Weinhold. He is an author of over 75 books on psychology and just one of the most fascinating human beings you could ever meet. He is also the host of the podcast Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Barry Weinhold. Dr. Weinhold, how are you today?
I'm grateful.
Excellent. That's I'm also extremely grateful today, and said a little thanks, giving of gratitude myself about a half hour ago. Just was overwhelmed with gratitude for the day, and sat and took a little quiet moment and reflected on that. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh boy, that's a pretty open-ended question.
It is, yeah.
Well, I grew up in a small town in eastern Pennsylvania, and been traveling west ever since then. I've taught in Ohio, went to school in Minnesota, taught in Wisconsin, and now I'm in Colorado, and probably here to stay.
Nice. How long have you been in the field of psychology?
Forever. Since I was 3.
What was it that got you into it, and what do you mean by that? You've been into it since you were 3 years old.
Well, I think I was trying to figure out what was going on in my family, and that required some psychological understanding, because it was a pretty crazy family. So I think that's where I started trying to figure things out and trying to figure out what was going on with other people around me. So, and then it led to teaching in high school, getting a PhD in psychology, teaching at universities for about 30 some years. And then writing a lot of books in the meantime. But I'm most proud of, and I all the way through I was kind of like a voice in the wilderness calling for the need for prevention in psychology. I mean, we basically, it's a medical model mostly, and so you don't really do anything until somebody gets sick or
Right.
something bad happens. This is not a good model, and so I was able to create a model of prevention at a university counseling center at the University of Wisconsin Green Bay. It was based on what is called the community mental health model, which was basically a model of prevention. And then when I came to Colorado Springs, I had the opportunity to create several prevention programs. One was a community violence prevention program called the Kindness Campaign, which was highly successful and then was actually utilized in 12 other communities around the country. And then I developed a curriculum for schools called the Kind and Safe Schools Initiative, which was basically to prevent peer violence in schools, bullying and other kinds of violence. And that's been adopted in over 700 schools across the country. And then finally, I got the opportunity to help design a program called the First Visitor Program, which allowed any new parents to request a home visitation from somebody who would come and give them support in their first. Well, actually, the visitor who came could stay with the family as long as 3 years if they needed that much time, but they didn't have to. But and we got the Mormon church ladies to design baby blankets, and that was the gift we gave when they came in the first week after the mother came home from the hospital. And they were basically people there who would possibly offer respite care, giving a lot of information about resources available to new parents. And the research on that is families that had first visitors, there was absolutely no child abuse and neglect. And it just was a amazingly successful prevention program. It was started here in El Paso and Teller County in Colorado Springs area, and now it's spread statewide. And every county in the state has a program where they call it Bright Beginnings, and they often have registered nurses going into homes, particularly where there's a medical issue. Wow. So I'm really those are kind of things that really warm my heart when I think about what I was able to accomplish in my life. Of course, I've loved writing, and writing books has been
Mhm.
come easy. Actually, when I was teaching, they paid me to do that, so I said, "Why not?" So produced a book a year every year I was teaching, and that became kind of after I retired, kind of my retirement hobby to keep on writing, and I've been doing that, and I have a couple of books that I've just published in the last few years, and I've got one on the way that should be uh, published early next year, and then another one that I haven't even written anything. I've just outlined it and got all the research done on it. So I have I'm busy writing, and then of course doing the podcast has been a really useful way of getting information out to people about how to live more authentic lives, and which I wrote the book Get Real, and may I talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Well, I have to take you all the way back to April 26, 1336 to start talking about that,
Okay.
because that was the day that on this bright sunny day that the Italian monk Petrarch climbed Mount Ventoux in southern France, in Provence area, and he was carrying a copy of St. Augustine's Confessions under his arms. His brother and a couple servants were with him, and he got to the top, and it was a pretty beautiful sunny day, and he looked to the right and he saw all the vineyards and the farms and the estates of the French countryside, and he looked to his left and he saw the bright blue Mediterranean spanning out in front of him. And he sat down on a rock and he cracked open this book, and he read the following: "And men go abroad to admire the heights of mountains, the mighty billows of the sea, the broadside of rivers, the compass of the oceans, and the circuit of the stars, and they pass themselves by." What he thought of was, oh my God, what's inside of me is equal to what's outside of me. It's called unus mundus, and it's the probably many scholars mark this as the beginning of the Renaissance. He went back to Italy, to Verona, I believe he lived in, and talked to his colleagues and wrote a book about it, spread the idea, and it really took on. And it's probably the beginning of two things: the environmental movement and also personal psychology. Carl Jung used a lot of the concepts from Unus Mundus in creating archetypes and the collective unconscious, and understanding that the world outside of us and the world inside of us was one. And so that was the beginning of the Renaissance. Then, if you remember Don Quixote, the book by Cervantes, the Spanish book, that one was near the end of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was interrupted by the Black Plague in 1347. So, similar to our Renaissance we've had here, we got interrupted by the pandemic, and so, but they came out of it. And then in 1606, Cervantes wrote Don Quixote, and interestingly, someone else wrote a fake version, and there were no copyright laws, and so he had to figure out, how in the world am I going to prove that I have the correct version and this other one's fake? So he wrote a second book in I think it was 1615, and his book was a bestseller. It traveled all over the world. It was translated in English in 1612, and everybody read it. And although it was all fictitious, it had a great deal of meaning for people. And so when he wrote the second book, he took the name of the author of the fake book and made it one of his main characters in his second book. And then in the second novel, he has Don Quixote confront this guy in a tavern, and have him finally admit that his book was a fake, and agree that he would go before a magistrate and declare that it is a fake. And that actually then happened after the book came out. The poor guy was stuck. He had to own up to the fact that he wrote a fake book. So we really, and then all during this time, of course, Copernicus wrote about how the Earth wasn't the center of the solar system, and that was controversial, and it wasn't until later, like 1630 or 47, not 1630 something, where Galileo proved Copernicus right, and that the Earth was not the center of the universe. And unfortunately, he got put in jail by the Catholic Church for 8 years for finding that out. So it was a tumultuous time at the end of the Renaissance, much like we have today. So when I wrote the book, I had this kind of thought about, we're at the end of an era, and at the end of any era, there's always kind of resistance. There's people who want to go back to the good old days, and then there are people who want to move to the future, and so that was really what was happening when Cervantes wrote his book. And I thought of the parallels, and in my book, Get Real, the subtitle is what is the subtitle? I can't remember it.
Is it the same as the podcast, How to Live a More Authentic Life?
No, it's how to avoid the obstacles of living out of a false self.
Yes.
Opposite. But anyway, in writing that book, I not only talked about how to live a more authentic life as an individual, but I thought about authentic couples, authentic families, and even I extended to look at our social system, capitalism, our political system, and what was not authentic about that. And of course, now we have many people think we're living in the post-truth era, where truth is no longer seen as the standard bearer. And so then I also wrote a chapter on how if we don't solve this dilemma, it won't mean the end of our democracy. It really is that serious. And the history of other empires that fell, it wasn't just a corrupt leader, it was the people themselves who didn't have very much power, and they just allowed things to deteriorate, and finally the empire ended. And so it's really a book that looks to the present and to the future, and has some warnings in there that I think are important.
It's a wonderful book, and there's a wonderful podcast that supports a lot of the same themes. And you've been doing wonderfully on that for about the last 6 to 9 months. What's next for Dr. Barry Weinhold?
Well, I also realized that the American people are psychologically stupid. Or maybe I should make it a little bit more polite and say they lack the right information psychologically to really lead productive lives. So that's my next venture. The next book is called "What is Your PsyQ? Your Psychological Intelligence Quotient." And the book is designed to give people basic information that would help them live better lives, live more authentic lives. And I'm going to start out the podcast in January with talking about the 20 badass, stupid beliefs that people have that get them in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's an evidence in my book of the psychological ignorance of American people. And I think it's not rocket science. If you just had a little bit better understanding of how your psyche works and how other people's psyche works, you could live better lives. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on in the podcast in the next year.
I love it. I'm excited. We are proud to be your producing partner on that podcast. And I'm looking forward to it. There's a brand new circle.org website that you can click the link in the description of this podcast and go check out with a ton of resources. I appreciate your time and your friendship. And I always look forward to our recording sessions and our chats. You are a wealth of knowledge, as you've shown just a little bit of in this podcast. And if you want to see Dr. Weinhold go deep on a subject, check out Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life. The link to that is also in the description of this podcast. Anything you want to leave us with, Barry, before you go?
Well, I'm hoping that you'll join us for the podcast in the next year because I think it will it'll turn some heads around.
I agree. I agree. It is absolutely wonderful, and you do a wonderful job. Sometimes I'm on the show. Sometimes it's Ashley, our good friend Ashley Ross from 321. And it's absolutely wonderful. And there's just a wealth of information. It's seriously, we're spoiled with all of the information that we get every episode. So thank you so much, Dr. Weinhold, for
Oh,
being
and
here.
thank you with your group for producing this quality show.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Barry.
Bye.
All right, guys, if you know anybody who you think would be a great guest on the show, please send me an email. You can find that in the description as well. And go check out Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life. Google or search on Amazon Dr. Barry Weinhold to check out any of his books. They're all incredible. And thank you. And check out circle.org because there's a ton of resources there. So I'll see you next time. Bye for now.